So we had some special elections on Tuesday, and take a look at what happened. Medicare-for-all progressive woman wins surprise victory in a key Nebraska House primary. Kara Eastman will face Republican incumbent Don Bacon, awesome name, in the Nebraska 2nd Congressional District in a crucial election. So Kara Eastman is a Justice Democrat. And the person she beat is a former representative, Brad Ashford. He was the establishment candidate, and he was backed by the DCCC. So this is really big news. It's a big win for people on the left fighting back against corporate Democrats. And oftentimes, we get sad. We get sad because they drown us out with their money, and then we lose. So this is an instance where the actual populist left-wing candidate was able to defeat the corporate Democrat, even though there was a clear establishment bias in favor of the corporate Democrat. Kara Eastman was able to overtake Brad Ashford, and listen, it was a tiny amount that she won by. She won by, I think it was 1%. So don't ever say, especially in a lot of these smaller races, congressional races and stuff like that, don't ever say that your vote doesn't count, because it definitely counts. All they had to do was, 1.5% of people who voted for Eastman, if they were to just be lazy, then this election would have went in the other direction, and we'd be having a totally different conversation right now. So thankfully it worked out, and look at that. She's pushing Medicare-for-all, and it was popular. Wow, this is exactly what we've been telling you all along. So, and I have to say, I get particularly excited when I see the results coming out of a lot of these red states. Now, they get a bad rap from establishment Democrats because they're red states. So there's basically this thing where they, like, if you're a corporate Democrat, you just kind of write off nearly half the country. You're like, nah, they're not worth our time. There's no way we're going to win there. But I was always of the philosophy that if you actually believe in what you're fighting for, well, then why wouldn't you take your argument there? See, I think that the policies and a social democratic philosophy that we push for, I think that actually can change people's minds. So I'm not going to write off half the country and half the states as like too stupid to get it, or, they're beyond hope and beyond help. No, I think that once you present people with the arguments for what you believe in, if you actually believe in it, then you think there's something persuasive there, and you think that if you try hard enough, you can chip away and get more people to agree with you. Now, I get it. Are there some people that are just too far gone? Of course. It's not like, I'm under any illusions about getting people in the Klan to agree with the social democratic philosophy. But what I do believe in is that there are more people who aren't too far gone, even in the Republican Party among your average Joe Republicans, than there are people who are too far gone. So, and what you see is like West Virginia, for example, with the teacher strike. What happened? They won. So that's a state, again, corporate Democrats would write that off from a million miles away before even giving it a fair shake. They'd be like, no, it's West Virginia, so there's not going to be, a workers' rebellion where they fight to try to get good pay for teachers. But not only were you wrong, they were the first ones to do it. They were the first ones to stand up and say, no, we actually want to fight for working people. So now you see Nebraska, pretty deep red state, and they just went for a Medicare-for-all style populist left candidate over an establishment Democratic candidate. Now, the conventional wisdom is, no, you have to go for the establishment Democrat, because that means that candidate is more centrist and is more willing to compromise with the right. Therefore, they're more viable. So you have to go in that direction. But how many times have we proved that ideology incorrect? That approach incorrect? Because just take a look at the primary, the 2016 primary, Hillary Clinton versus Bernie Sanders. Bernie won in almost all the deep red states. Why? Because it turns out people don't know enough about labels to accurately discuss where they fall on the political spectrum. So in other words, if you go talk to a lot of the people who even voted for Kara Eastman, they'd tell you, you know what, I consider myself in the center. I'm a moderate. Even among conservative Democrats, self-described conservative Democrats, Bernie Sanders beat Hillary Clinton and beat her in a landslide. Now, that makes no sense at face value because it's just a fact of reality that Hillary Clinton is more conservative than Bernie Sanders. But when you talk to these people who self-describe as conservative, they'll tell you, yeah, I kind of like the idea of a Medicare-for-all system. Yeah, I like the idea of raising taxes on Wall Street. Yeah, I like the idea of having, a free college education. Yeah, I like the idea of paid vacation time. Yeah, I like the idea of a New Deal to create jobs around the country and rebuild our infrastructure. Yeah, I like the idea of ending wars. So even though they describe themselves as conservative, when you go issue for issue, they're actually very strongly populist left. So that's why in a lot of these deep red states, Bernie Sanders destroyed Hillary Clinton. By the same token, all the conventional wisdom would say Kara Eastman has no shot in Nebraska, but she won because the conventional wisdom is utter dog shit. So, and this is what we've been screaming from the mountaintops. Now, listen, if you don't get a total and complete populist left wave, what I need everybody to understand is you don't need to, get down on yourself and be upset because, like I said, there's an institutional disadvantage for what we're doing here. So since a lot of these populist left candidates, they take no corporate PAC money and they're only raising in small dollar donations, that does make it so that it's much harder to get the word out and much harder to buy ads. And so you need to rely on word of mouth. And it's just you're fighting an uphill battle. So Paula Jean Swearingen, for example, raised less than $200,000. Joe Manchin raised $6 million. So that is such a giant disadvantage that it's hard to overcome it. It just is. But that doesn't mean that since Joe Manchin beat Paula Jean Swearingen, for example, that, all of us are supposed to go, well, I guess Medicare-for-all isn't popular. I guess that's not the right thing to do for the country. Well, I guess fighting for union rights is not a good idea. No, that's not true. It just means that we have to keep fighting because you need to stay competitive when it comes to the money, but then you also need to campaign properly and get your name out there and do all the hard work. And, sometimes you can have somebody who's right on all the issues, but for whatever reason, it just doesn't work out. So that just means, you start back from square one and you keep fighting. And as long as you believe in your philosophy and your ideas, you have a decent chance of eventually winning. Well, here's a situation where Kara Eastman was able to pull it out this time around. So that's fantastic news. Now, here's some other good news for you. 4 socialist-backed, Democratic socialist-backed candidates win Pennsylvania legislative primaries. So this is really awesome because when you get to state house races, that's where you really can see how popular populist left ideas are versus other ideas, because these are races where money is not as important. The bigger the office, the more important money is. So, for a Senate race, money is super important. But when you get to, local level, state level races, the money's not as important because people just can't raise as much. So there you really are relying on the ground game, the grassroots, knocking on doors. And here's what I guarantee you. Democratic socialists have a lot more grassroots power than any establishment group. You think Third Way has a lot of grassroots support? No, they don't. In fact, their whole business model is the opposite of grassroots support. We're going to rely on Wall Street. We're going to rely on people who consider themselves centrist, and they try to push that philosophy from the top down, from big money interests down. Whereas Democratic Socialists, it's grassroots, it's bottom up. So that's why you see so many Democratic Socialist candidates winning. Remember, it wasn't just this election. In the previous special election, I remember when we did the coverage on this, a bunch of Democratic Socialists won that time around too. Why? Because they're organizing at the state level. They're fighting at the state level. And I cannot express to you how important this is, guys. Then there was Jess King. Jess King is another Justice Democrat. And she was unopposed when push came to shove towards the end of this race. Now, she wasn't always unopposed, but her opponent dropped out at a certain point. And so she advances into the general election in Pennsylvania's 11th district. The only downside, I think, was Greg Edwards, who lost in Pennsylvania's 7th district. I think he was backed by Justice Democrats and Our Revolution, and for whatever reason, he wasn't able to pull it out. But the good news is, there were two other Democrats who were viable. One of them was a conservative, like legit conservative, blue dog style type Democrat. And then the other one was center-leftish Democrat. Not totally establishment, but also not totally populist. Greg Edwards was more populist than her. But the conservative Democrat lost, thankfully. So not the worst result in the world, but just not the best result either. So, and also I should mention, in Greg Edwards' race, there was DCCC meddling against him, because that's what the DCCC has been doing, going around and trying to destroy all of the populist left candidates. That's their whole goal. We've covered 1,000 stories about that, and it really is disgusting, because what you notice is oftentimes the Republican establishment backs the people who super serve the Republican base. The Democratic establishment backs the people who stab the Democratic base in the back. So they try to fight back against the base, as opposed to agreeing with the base and working with the base and pushing for what the base wants, whereas on the Republican side, it's the opposite. They're always kind of super serving their base, because it just so happens that a lot of the stuff their most hardcore supporters want also happens to be the same stuff that, you know, the Koch brothers want, and that Wall Street billionaires want, and that super Christian fundamentalists want. So there's a huge structural problem there as well. But listen, overall, the results here were fantastic. It was a great election. And listen, man, I just want everybody to know again, even though there are going to be some losses that come in the future, of course, just remember about all these victories, because that shows you it's possible. Because oftentimes, you know, we get down on ourselves and we're like, I don't know, if we couldn't win that one, no, I can't. Then is there really any hope? The answer is yes, there is hope. And there are always results that we can point to that prove that there's hope. So just keep fighting on, and we have a chance, man. We have a chance. I've been talking about this a lot recently. In my mind, two things can happen in the 2018 election that can just be absolutely devastating. One is it's mixed results, in which case the Republicans get to trot around and go, ha, I told you, no Democratic backlash. People don't hate Donald Trump. And we're perfectly popular. That's a terrible scenario. Another scenario is Democrats win. There's a giant backlash. Democrats win, but they don't actually push for progressive policies. You get the shitty kind of centrist Democrats that take over, and then you get a Democratic wave without Democratic policies being implemented. That's a terrible thing too, because then what the fuck was the point of the wave if you're just going to continue with the status quo and people's lives continue to stagnate and in many cases get worse, and we continue all the wars? So what we really want is a Democratic backlash with Democratic policies that help the people. And listen, either one of the first two options are terrible, but there is a third option. We actually have a populist left wave, in which case we get not just Democratic politicians, but Democratic policies. And my message is, even if we don't get it this first time around, the populist left wave, it will come eventually, as long as we don't get too disheartened. As long as we don't go, we didn't win right away, so let's pack it up and go home. No, keep fighting. Keep fighting, and then eventually, when we win, those days will be glorious, because we'll get all the policies that we've been talking about, all the things that would improve the lives of regular Americans. So good news in this previous election, and let's take this momentum and go forward.